So I'm pretty sure it'll benefit the listeners if I give a legal synopsis or at least an update. So when I started putting videos up there, we started off at the courthouse, which is the historic courthouse, um, Department C, and the respondent. I'm the petitioner. The respondent is Jessica Lopez, the social worker for Napa County, former case manager for Napa Empowering Women's Services here in Napa, and former case manager for the Federal Halfway House. I'll have to get the name in San Diego. I'm gonna get it and I'll tag that and everything on there, um, so I could map out a chronology for y'all. So I filed in March of 2022. I'm the petitioner. We have a son. We have a stepson, which is her biological son, the one that I've cited in many of these videos. He's grown up. He lives in San Diego with the people who were his guardians that became permanent guardians. Um, and our biological son lives with us here in Napa. Um, she was not represented, nor I'm improper, pro se, self represented litigant. She was throughout. I filed last March. We had court in December. She didn't make it. We asked for an extension in January. On that first date in court, she shows up represented. The day before court, she goes and gets an attorney. His name is Gregory C. Winter. He and I do not favor each other. And those of you who have attended court, and I always invite people to attend court so you can see how this guy carries himself as a so-called professional attorney, officer of the court. The word officer, it shouldn't even be in the same vocabulary when talking about this guy as far as I'm concerned, because he's, the word officer is just doesn't seem to resonate with me with the way he carries himself and behaves. But and from the beginning, since day one, that was pretty apparent. And that's when some of the shenanigans actually started. Um, it was that day that I informed him that there was an issue of bigamy. I brought it up to the court, to Commissioner Robert Stamps that day, that I had to see if there was, if we're even in the right proceedings of dissolution of marriage, as because that there was, uh, what do you call it, bigamy. And so from that date, according to her filings, at the advice of her attorney Gregory Winter, they started putting together her annulment with this other guy. Because if you're able to succeed in one annulment, potentially ad initio goes back to the beginning, you could negate the second one. So that was their strategy. Um, Unfortunately, the way they did it on the day of, we had a hearing on May the 1st, which was to cover travel to Mexico because she wants to take our kid out of the country. And she was complaining about not allowing her to take our son out of the country after filing for divorce, which is perfectly normal within the ATROs, that they always complain about, trying to say that I violated them by making such moves. But we'll figure that out in the next court hearing. But it makes no sense for anybody to allow the other person to take their kid to Mexico, especially considering all the stuff that's happened, all the other issues with the murders, of past relatives and the existing people of power in those places, and her laissez-faire attitude and approach towards safety protocol and just caution, their drinking habits, their travel with lack of sleep and always pressing the edge with that. They just did it again this weekend. Right after the last court date, they took a trip to San Diego, and again, they did the same thing. Drives all the way to Southern California, showing up at like 2 o'clock in the morning. One driver. She had other people in the car, but she usually won't sleep. But anywho, so on May the 1st, we had a hearing, and I requested to amend from dissolution of marriage to annulment. The judge approved to allow me to file that. And then we had the hearing coming up for her annulment. So on May the 3rd, or on the May the 1st, and it was courtroom C that we started out, but then we had to go to juvenile hall. That's where I put that video on, because the judge had other hearings she had to do over there at juvenile hall, so it was set for a later time in the day at juvenile hall. And Gregory C. Winters, he said, I'm not party to this action, even though he advised her to make these moves. And it kind of makes sense that I figured out later on, because if they're going to go in there and commit perjury. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. And it's right up here?
Yes, ma'am. My son's sitting right in there. If Greg's going to be party to it, and if he knows they're committing perjury and working with these little sideways maneuvers and schemes, him's an attorney, he ain't supposed to be party to anything like that. But that didn't stop him from stepping up on May the 3rd as a surprise appearance that day on behalf of the respondent, even though he's not supposedly party to that endeavor. And he argued and argued why I shouldn't be adjoined to it, that he tried to say that what was going on over in courtroom 6 was a nothing burger when we already had the hearing and the judge has approved to amend. But if they were successful at getting their annulment done, it would kind of negate all that. Unless I have to file an appeal or request for the court to reconsider, which may have already passed the allotted time for that, and I only have a few more days to file for an appeal, because my position was then, as it is now, you have 4 years to file for an annulment from the time that you found out that there's bigamy. They started out together in this. They were arrested and charged, and she pled guilty and he pled guilty, and he went to go do his time. I presented all the proof and evidence, their own handwriting and everything, and communications correspondence, the notice of asset forfeiture from the DEA. It was all right there. They knew what they were doing since the beginning. So that statute, that clock, that 4 years started in 2010. October, when this all started. And her attorney was trying to cite Sefton versus Sefton. And it kind of, nobody's saying that there's no statute of limitations on bigamy. There's statutes of limitations on when you can file, because if you intentionally entered into that without reasonable, if you intentionally entered into it without a reasonable assumption that the marriage was valid, then the marriage becomes valid. So that's something that would have to be taken up by the California Supreme Court, which now that's something else I'll have to do. But then again, I've been in a pickle as to focusing on all this other stuff, having to work and do everything else. That the time lapsed on the approval that I had to file to amend this to a dissolution. I mean, to an annulment. Excuse me. So on the 3rd, like I said, Gregory Winter, he shows up. He argues aggressively that I shouldn't be allowed to be adjoined, and the judge approves me to be. He says, come back on Friday the 5th. We come back on the 5th. He approves for me to be adjoined to the matter. And like I said, she's actually the petitioner in that matter, because she's trying to say that bigamy was performed against her by Marvin Mace, even though they did it together. Like they were, they're back on the crime road again, working together in cahoots. And it was obvious by the way, the lies that they pressed onto the court, because there's an investigation, which I'll read that, from Napa County, county commissioners, county supervisors, who kicked it down to the Human Resources Department. And I'm going to go into that with Christine Briseño and, was Alfredo Pedroza. I got a lot of pictures. I think it's time to start showing the pictures and drawing the connections between who the respondent in this matter and who she is associated with by her former employee, Napa Empower Women's Services, and who they're all connected to as a nonprofit, and then the transition that a lot of these people having worked there go into these county positions. And everywhere I go to get help, that's who I bump into, is her former coworkers, either from news or from the county of Napa, from Child Welfare Services. So you hit a wall as a parent, and you're trying to protect your child. Can you imagine trying to protect your child against a child welfare services social worker who has an alcohol problem that was getting drunk with all these people, and they're the ones that have a vested interest to protect her and to protect themselves by making sure this stuff kind of stays under wrap, or they try to water it down. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I'm here to protect my kid. I'm not a paid attorney, none of that shit, man. I'm a father, and these people, what they did was abhorrent. When I went to them and asked them for help after all the years of them failing me, and then they failed my son in 2017 and 18 horribly, our son was harmed, and they did nothing. Now they want to change their tune, because I'm going to read to y'all what Alexis Vossmeyer says. Then I'm going to redact and read some of the report, because I can't read all of it. It's not, and where it says that there is no victim. Now she says that there is a victim, or that we're victims. But then I say, hey, so are you changing what was once said now? And then she stops responding again. That's what it is. When they catch some stuff stepping in shit, they try to back up off of it, because they're like, oh wait. And yeah, I feel that they are responsible and liable for this, because they're trying to protect a known alcoholic with multiple DUIs who had protection orders against them for their first child, completely squandered that shit, had a second opportunity and started drinking and driving again here in Napa as a social worker, pissing on herself out in public, in front of my kid, in the Oxbow. Saw the pictures and did their very best to try to bury it. Alexis Vossmeyer, shame on you. I can't remember the director's name, but shame on you. I'm going to read the emails. Yeah, because that ain't cool. A parent, you guys' mission statement right there in the lobby says that you guys are here to protect, provide a safe environment. But whenever it comes to your own people that may be called into question, you guys have a different approach. And that's not cool, because that's not protecting the children, especially not my child. My child is my responsibility. And when I went to you guys for help, all you had to do was do the right thing and sit your little soldier down and say, get it together, help her out. Like, hey, we got this. Maybe another social worker will go with. Like, hey, if you got a thing. Nah, instead, they tried to bury it and they emboldened her, and the behavior got more egregious and continued. There was a slight pause, and there's going to be a slight pause now until the judges and everybody's in the rearview mirror. Then she's going to hit that gas again, because that's what she does. And y'all are helping her. So it's time to expose the whole thing. At whatever cost to me, I'm willing. That way someday along the line, my son will know that I did everything I could to protect him. And you guys, everybody in this country, in this county, in this state, should know how you guys carry yourselves. Shame on you guys.